This is 99.3 Nigeria Info. You are welcome to the show. Today is the International Day for Persons Living with Disabilities, and we have conversations around this going on for the next hour. Remember that you can join us on Facebook and YouTube, where we're streaming live, and you can just do a quick search for Nigeria Info 99.3, and you can find us there, watch us, and also leave us your comments and your thoughts. You can also reach us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM. You can use the hashtag Morning Crossfire. Hashtag Morning Crossfire, so we can also read from you. If you want to leave us a WhatsApp message, the number is 08095975805, 08095975805. I am Wemimo Adewuni. You're welcome.
I am Sheriff Quadry. It's a pleasure to know that you're there listening to us live from wherever you are. Please follow us as we go along on the show this morning. Let's start the show with some numbers, shall we? 15% of the world's population. 15% of the world's population, that's about 1 billion people, they experience one form of disability or another. This is according to the World Bank. Human Rights Watch reports that about 15% of Nigeria's population, amounting to at least 25 million people, have a disability. And there's more. Just listen. 20% of the world's poor are disabled. Children with disabilities are less likely to attend school than non-disabled children. Education completion gaps are found across all age groups in all settings, with a pattern more pronounced in poorer countries. Now, the theme of this year's observation of the International Day for Persons with Disabilities, first proclaimed in 1992 by the UN General Assembly, which is now commemorated every year on December 3, is promoting the participation of persons with disabilities and their leadership taking action on the 2030 Development Agenda. Now, the 2030 Development Agenda, focuses on empowering persons with disabilities for inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development, and pledges to leave no one behind. That is the agenda, and also promises to recognize disability as a cross-cutting issue to be considered in the implementation of its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are the blueprint for a more sustainable future for everyone.
Well, we have joining us in the studio today Daniel Ortiz from the Albino Foundation. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to hear.
We also have Mr. Akinjide Akinpelu from the Federal Nigeria Society for the Blind. Good to have you join us on the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Over the phone, we have joining us the National President of Joint National Association of Persons with Disability, and also she's the General Secretary of Africa Disability Forum, Ekaite Judith Umor. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good morning. I was trying to not say Omar. Well, we ran you Umar. Yes, I got that wrong. We ran you through some numbers when we started. There's more data where that came from.
Plenty.
If you're not scared yet, if it's not worrisome, that 20% of the world's poor people are currently disabled,
right,
and 15% of the world's population right now has one form of disability. In Nigeria, 15% of Nigeria's total population have one disability or the other. Now, if you look at children, the percentage of children with disabilities not attending school is extremely variable, and that's set between 65 and 85%. Let's start with this, Ekaite. Children living with disabilities, many times we focus on adults and how they get by, how do they standard of living. But for children, it's a different ball game, because their parents need to watch out for them, and they also need education to become independent persons by themselves. How are we doing in this regard in Nigeria?
Thank you so very much for having me on this program, and happy International Celebration of Persons with Disabilities Day to all my colleagues. I'm so excited. I'm almost losing my words. So
good to have you too. Right.
So happy celebration to all my colleagues out there. Yeah. Let me start by saying just a little bit. It's continuous awareness, continuous education. Just to say that the term living with disabilities is obsolete as it is now. It is persons with disabilities, not persons living with disabilities. So also with children with disabilities. So this is just to take the focus off the individual and put it back in the society. We are not living with it, but we live in an environment that is not recognizing that we are here. So the disability is not with us, it's with society. As we discussed, we unpack that, very well. So talking about children with disabilities, I mean, it's same thing for the Nigerian child.
Right.
Where, we have the Child's Rights Act, and what necessitated that was because we noticed that children were being neglected in so many aspects of life, and we're not treating them very well. So you can imagine what happens to children with disabilities. Now they have children who have impairments, and maybe this impairment is posing some kind of challenges to the family, and they're trying to cope with those challenges. And so you can imagine how taxing that would be.
Right.
And if government is not also looking at that very carefully as a Nigerian child, that burden becomes too much for the family. But for children with disability, we are focusing on their education, because that is where to start from. That is the best thing that you can give to any child as it is.
Right.
So what we have noticed is that children with disabilities are not getting equal and quality education that they are supposed to get. Education system is, in the past, I don't know, we are really advocating that we have inclusive education as well.
Right.
You'll be very familiar with school for the blind, school for the deaf, a lot of labeling, and school for the handicap and all of that.
Right.
All these special schools, we are not condemning them, but they've been, children with disability have been institutionalized in a corner and in a system that is grossly underfunded. So the kind of education that they have, you can't compare it to children without disabilities.
Well, there have been arguments on one of the points you raised about having special schools for children living with disability and how this might impair inclusivity. But some other arguments would be that if you put children with special needs in normal schools, put those in quotation marks, in schools with other children without special needs, then they might not get the attention that they need, because then you need special needs teachers for special needs children. So would you believe that, do you think we should still have these exclusive schools for children with special needs, or we should mix them up with other children? But how really would that work?
Perfectly, it's working. The Salamanca Declaration talks about inclusive education.
Okay.
Everyone has got special needs. What special needs are we talking about here? So what we are advocating here is that children with or without disability must learn and play in the same environment to develop some kind of social skills. Please, can you just show me one special market or one special society or one special base? This leads to segregation.
This is very valuable.
We don't have a special market for people living with special needs.
A special market. Just show me that special market. If you have a child with a disability within your family, do you have a special room where you keep that child?
Judith, in essence, what you're saying is that even the system is discriminatory.
Yes, unknowingly, ignorantly. If you look at the SDG 4 goal for speaks to inclusive education. We have a way. In time past, we didn't know how to go about it. Now we know how to go about it, and we're unpacking all of those. If we don't have special market, special this, special that special skill, please, could you bring it to the mainstream setting? So
well, I think you got me on the market thing, and I really just put a full stop after that. But let me ask Daniel. Daniel, one of the questions I've asked Daniel before is, many people wonder, how come people living with albinism are classified as also under disability? I've had people argue with me when I did that report on Sun Not Salt. People saying, but how can you say they're also living with disabilities, Daniel?
I think we made it clear, even on 3 conditions. Number 1 is albinism is actually the lack of melanin pigment in the skin, in the eyes, and in the hair. I mean, the cells that is supposed to bring those pigments that give the skin color. Right. And it is the color that actually protects the ultraviolet rays that spoils the skin cells that can actually, makes people with albinism susceptible to cancer. So because we have limitation of that melanin, so if we expose ourselves to the sun, we have cancer. So that is one, the skin, even these eyes, because the melanin is also not in the eyes.
Right.
We have low vision as a result of that.
Right.
And I'm trying to bring it under the categories of the UN
classification.
UN classification says disability must be a permanent impairment, either physical, sensory, intellectual, that one has that will not allow him to operate on equal basis with the rest of the society optimally. So when you look at the skin, when you look at the low vision case, and even there is a social model that the UN is following on disability, which includes social stigmatization, institutionalized, permit me to use that word.
Okay.
If you're an albino in Canada, you will not be considered as having disability because the social system, the educational level there does not, there is enlightenment about what albinism is all about.
People are well educated about what albinism is all about.
Yes. But here in Africa, you will consider albinism in 21st century in Africa being disability based on those conditions, for the fact that they can be impaired by their skin.
Right.
I cannot stand in the sun for 2 hours as easy as you can. My vision is not as clear as yours by reason of this limitation in melanin that I have that you don't have.
Right.
So, and more importantly is that social stigma that is still attached to albinism in Africa as at 2020.
Right.
If twins were born in Africa in 1800, in 1900, twin would have been classified as disability then, even though it is not. So under these three classifications, I can also say that those who make the objections that albinism is not disability are those who are born in a family of the top 1% who will not have who will have lower incidences of facing this stigmatized discrimination that is evident to up to 95% of persons with albinism.
Right. So if we do better with conditions for people living with disability, education, access to work, safe workplaces, because albinos can't work just anywhere. They can't stay under the sun.
Which is under the UN declaration, which is that empowerment that is not allowing them to operate on equal basis with others.
Maximally. But if we're able to deal with this in Nigeria, then albinism can be removed as disability. But we're still far.
We are still very far as it is now.
Okay, well, let me come to you, and we're still looking at the basis. We're setting the foundation for our topic this morning, which is, of course, looking at persons with disabilities in Nigeria. As someone who is in the forefront of all of these struggles for persons living with disabilities, how far behind would you say we are as a people in tackling challenges people with disabilities are plagued with in Nigeria?
Well, I would like to say we're not too far compared to where we've been coming from. We are trying. It's just that, like they always say, there's still a lot of room for development. We're trying. We're not where we were. Because at least what used to be beginning from the home, parents who like to hide their parents, which
their children,
their
right?
children, yes. Parents like to hide their children. Sorry for that. They hide their children. They don't want to, associate with them. But now, at least, there's been a lot of advocacy, a lot of talks. So parents, at least, they're bringing out their children. They're bringing out their words out. So that's a good step in the right direction.
What do you think could be responsible for parents hiding their kids back in the day? I still know that some parents still do hide, their children, even up till now. And if you ask me, I would say that the societal stigmatization is quite rife, and not like Daniel said earlier. The level of education and exposure of our people is still pretty low, and you're saying that it's far better now.
Well, social status. Some of these people's, these children, they come from rich homes, wealthy homes, So the kind of level with the father finds himself in society might debar him from saying, no, how will people view me with this kind of my social status in society? And I'm having a special child. So they still prefer to kind of hide them away, maybe pretend as if it's not there, and like that.
So we have various types of disabilities.
Right.
I think it's a good time to run through this.
Yes, please.
Let me ask you, Ekaite. I like the Ekaite name, so let me stay with Ekaite. You're the national president of Joint National Association of Persons with Disabilities. So tell us, what category of people are called under this classification of disability? What really is a disability?
Okay, so disability as a word is a social construct, And it's not something we can clearly define, except we are, relating it, contextually
Okay.
and doing some comparative analysis to help you understand what we mean by disability. But it is very clear with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. If you look at Article 1, it says there are persons who have, long-term impairments that may interact with, when interaction with the physical environment would produce participation restriction. So if I may want to break it down for our listening audience, we have two kinds of disability, classes of disability, visible and invisible disability.
Okay.
So at the Joint National Association of Persons with Disabilities, currently we have 6 clusters, and we're building more clusters, or, to add to the umbrella body. We have those with physical disabilities. We have those with visual disabilities. We have those with intellectual disabilities. The association of those affected by leprosy. We have spinal cord injury. We have those with hearing disability. They are the deaf. Deaf is deaf. But there are also those with psychosocial disability, which is not very visible as we move on. Albinism is also trying to, construct in such a way, going by the definition of UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So what is disability then? Disability recognizes the fact that we have diversity within a community or society, and there are people who may have impairments. We are not denying the fact that we have impairments, but the argument here is that impairment or those impairments is not enough to cause the disability that we feel.
Okay.
And that society is constructed in such a way, not taking into consideration that we have people with impairments, and so they do this one-size-fits-all approach. When we try to participate within society, we meet various kinds of barriers.
Right.
And these barriers could be attitudinal barriers, environmental barriers, institutional barriers. And these barriers now prevent those with impairment from participating on an equal basis with others. And that is when the disability shows up.
Well, let's start with some of those impairments. During the elections, we had a conversation about inclusivity during elections so that people who are also living with disability can freely participate and vote. We also have challenges in the banking sector. For instance, someone who's on a wheelchair cannot enter into a banking hall. So how do they conduct transactions? You want to use the ATM. Someone who's visually impaired would need another person to aid them use the ATM because we don't have braille on the keypads of the ATM. So it looks like institutionally, although we have these conventions that you've mentioned, in fact, I would like to run you through some of them. It's full page. We have the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and if you do a breakdown, after about 20 years, since 1999, this bill had been with the National Assembly. The president finally gave assent to the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act. Daniel, I remember we cut a cake when this was. We did cut a cake,
A lot of activism before the cake.
Before, 20 years after. Now, the act, which has now been passed into law in Nigeria, prohibits all forms of discrimination against a person living with disability. And if an individual is found violating this law, he or she will pay a fine of 100,000 or serve a term of 6 months imprisonment. Also, there's a fine of 1 million naira on corporate bodies. So, Mr. Akikbalu, do you look forward to a time where banks, for instance, their corporate bodies, will begin to pay fines for not allowing access for someone on a wheelchair, for instance? Or how do you use the ATM, Mr. Akikbalu?
Well, I use the ATM through the aid of someone.
Okay.
So, my privacy is being intruded in.
Right.
So that's not so good. My money was stolen because they told us to go and wait, and I was waiting for the person, and
the person just went away with the money.
Did you feel betrayed when that happened?
I really felt very, 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 very betrayed.
Was it someone you knew, or you just asked someone?
So someone from the bank. For security reasons, I don't go to the bank with and outside. I always ensure that it's someone within the bank premises.
Right.
So that person from the bank went away with their money.
Yes.
Did you get the money back from them?
I didn't get it.
Why?
I think the branch manager discovered that it was one of them, so he decided to kind of cover it up. And they kept on telling me, come today, come tomorrow. So I think that bill, I would like to see it happen. But the problem we have as Nigerians, the bill has been passed. It was first Vision 2020, Vision this. 2020 is here.
It's next month, right?
In just a matter of days. Now they're shifting it to 2030. So it's not making bills, making enactments, but how the bringing it to pass.
Implementation.
Yes,
but
the
did you report this
implementation
issue? Did you, so we have these laws that we all agree, but if we don't test them, if you don't sue them, if you don't take them to court, then we can't have the implementation.
Yeah, I didn't report. I only reported to the banking authorities who promised me that they were going to.
When did this happen?
Like 2 years backwards.
Indeed.
Because I would have really been so interested.
Like 2 years back.
Indeed.
It just buttresses the issue that persons with disabilities face all across. We've had complaints about people who are hearing impaired who goes to the bank. Normally, when you do sign language, it's an international language. You are literate, not just literate. You are learned.
Yes, you are.
For you to
Yes.
to sign. So this deaf person was actually signing, and they called security to throw him out.
Why?
Even accusing him that
Maybe it's Boko Haram.
he's a thief.
Is a thief. Why?
Because they don't understand. They are not conscious.
So
of this.
my question is, why has nobody sued the banks? We now
Because
have a law.
that
This is discrimination because all banks should have someone who can sign.
We are working on that. In some cases, I've actually went to some banks who don't have RAM, and I told them that look, this is a false complaint because from 23rd, this law is in force.
Right.
That if I just lodge a complaint, a petition to you that for the fact that your organization employs more than 100 people, is supposed to have accessibility that is via RAM for now. For instance, if I lodge that complaint, section 6 subsection 1 and 2 says that immediately that complaint is lodged in and acknowledged, after some time you begin to accrue 10,000 per day if those issues are not addressed.
Attended to. So,
Yes.
Mr. Kikbelu, you have an association, Federal Nigeria Society of the Blind. What are you doing in making corporate bodies accountable based on this law?
Yeah, well, recently they went to the Lagos State House of Assembly to advocate for persons with visual challenge. As I'm holding now, I'm holding a white cane.
Okay.
If anybody sees me, she'll be able to recognize that I have sight challenge. That
Right.
it has reflectors and all. But you discover that these downfall drivers, they see you, some want to collect it from you thinking it's a juju stick that will make them some money.
Oh.
And,
Again,
so-
education.
Yes, education. So I
Capacity,
think a lot still has to be done in terms of enlightenment, which is what we are doing, advocating for more and more awareness. That when you see,
I would
these
like to
people-
see more cases in court.
In fact,
Sincerely.
No,
the fact
if this
is-
bill had come out a little bit earlier, the cases we have, I think if we had sued, I'm sure
I
that
think you can
by
still
now-
sue. Can,
Wait,
okay,
yes,
okay.
certainly.
Post,
The fact is
prison.
that
Yeah.
people can sue, but what about even the government that passed the bill and the president that assented to the bill 11 years down the line? The primary organ to execute this act is the National Disability Commission.
Okay.
11 days down the line, that commission is not set. That is supposed to be the executive body to see to the implementation, to tax even government agencies to make sure that they comply to the provisions of this law. Individuals, corporate organizations, civil society groups can sue companies to observe. But when you also look even in the ministerial appointment and the Federal Executive Council,
Right.
the provisions of the law says 5% of appointments should go to persons with disabilities.
Is that
As
happening
it stands
yet?
now, no.
No.
It's not.
Absolutely.
Even by the government that passed the act.
You know what, Daniel? Let's
Okay.
let's put a lead on that. Ekaite, please stay on the line because we need to head out now for a break. I'm sure that we're reaching the crescendo of these arguments.
Right.
So we get to it, but we need to take a break. In case you are just joining us, you're welcome. Feel free to drop your comments, your thoughts on this conversation we're having on our socials. We're right back in a moment. I'm Sheriff Quadry.
I'm Wemimo Adewuni.
More talk, news, and sports after this.
#1 talk news and sports station. This is the Morning Crossfire with Wemimo and Sheriff.
And yes, we're back. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Interesting conversation we're having in commemoration of the International Day for Persons with Disabilities. We have on the line Ekaite Judith Umar, the National President of Joint National Association of Persons with Disability and General Secretary of Africa Disability Forum. We also have in the studio here Daniel Oti from the Albino Foundation. Akinjide Akinpelu is also here with us. From the Federal Nigeria Society for the Blind. In case you are joining now, please, we'll be taking your comments and your thoughts any moment now on WhatsApp. The line is 0809 597 5805, or you can tweet us at Nigeria Info FM on Twitter. That is at Nigeria Info FM Twitter. We'll prefer you tweet us. We're having some technical issues with the WhatsApp portal right now. So tweet us at Nigeria Info FM or drop a comment, because you can watch us live on Facebook and YouTube. So you can drop a comment below the video that you're watching at Nigeria Info 99.3 on those platforms. That's right. You're welcome back. I'm Sheriff Quadry.
And I'm Wemimo Adewuni. I love where we were before we went on the break.
Absolutely.
It practically got me sitting at the edge of my seat. So now we have a law that's been, of course, assented by the president just this year, January. I can vividly remember the cake. that makes me remember when it was signed into law.
It's always good to have cake.
Yes, like we should have another one today.
Hopefully.
Now, the Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act. Let's look at other parts of this act. It provides for a 5-year transition period within which public buildings, structures, or automobile, including public buses, must be modified to be accessible to and usable by persons with disability, including those on wheelchairs.
Exactly.
Also, before a public structure is constructed, its plans must be instructed by relevant authorities to ensure that the plan conforms with the building code. Also, any government, a government agency, body, or individual responsible for the approval of buildings shall not approve the plan of a public building if the plan does not make provision for accessibility facilities in line with the building code. And any officer who approves or directs the approval of such a building that contravenes the building code commits an offence, is liable on conviction to a fine of at least 1 million naira or imprisonment term of 2 years or both. Ekaite, so this is fabulous, and we have 5 years. 1 year is almost gone now. It was earlier this year. So 5 years to transition public buildings, to transition automobiles. Please, do you see this progression happening? Do you think Nigeria will meet up with this 5-year deadline? For persons on wheelchairs to be able to also access public buses, including BRT buses. Ekaite.
Yeah, very well. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. There's what we term progressive realization. So, what are the building blocks? Have we set up an implementation strategy? How are we working to translating this law into, because the law itself is not enough to give us the rights that we want.
Right.
It's just a tool for us to pursue that which we want. It means we now have a legal tool to enforcing or to working towards making sure that we have, an inclusive society. So what are we actually putting in place to make sure that happens? So it's going to take collective effort. Yeah, it's not just going to be civil society making all the noise or shouting. It's going to take both the demand and the supply side, sitting around the table, putting disability and the very, very heart of development, and discussing it as a human rights issue and as a development issue.
With what is going on right now, with what is going on in Ekaite right now, what I want to know is, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to know, with the indicators that you have right now, do you see a sincerity of purpose on the part of the implementers, which is, of course, the government?
I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic. It's going to happen. That is fine, then they gave us the law, is good enough. The next thing is for us to start pushing for this to happen.
Right.
If I think the government is not doing well, what am I doing as well? Do I have that clear implementation strategy that is marketable, that I can sell to that business company that can come into this? Remember, it's not going to be government alone. corporate organizations need to buy into this as well.
Absolutely.
You're talking of accessible buses. This is real business.
Right.
So disability is going to go beyond CROS, and we'll be looking at it from the business perspective. So how are we marketing disability to give it that business flavor, to bring investors, to doing business, so that we can have inclusive society? Because that's what happened elsewhere. It's not just going to, government. Yes, government has given us the platform, the tool. It is you and I to be smart enough. Imagine if I was very smart business-wise. I just go somewhere, I say, come, investors, you come here. I think if you have some accessible buses, some ABC can happen. We have the population, we have the market.
Right.
You just told us not less than 15% of persons with disability, which is much more because of all the crisis that's happening around the country.
Right.
Over 20% of 200 million people are persons with disabilities. Let's assume that we have from that 15%, let's even say that 10% of those are those with persons with physical disabilities, and they need to use this accessible buses.
Right.
And I'm a businessman. This is clearly business. Will I not partner with the Nigerian government to say I've got business because I need your people to have quality life? Those are the arguments we should be driving now.
I love how you think, Ekaite. I mean, the business aspects would really drive this growth. When people see possibilities. Let me ask Akijide. So let me read to you another part of this act. Discrimination against persons is prohibited in public transportation facilities, and service providers are to make provision for the physically, visually, and hearing impaired and all persons, however, challenged. This applies to seaports, railways, and airport facilities. Again, I would ask you, so how's mobility for persons living with visual impairment in terms of using public buses, railways, airports?
I think for us it's the most easiest for us because we can walk around. We can walk around and we are guiding or with a sighted guide. So it's a little bit easy for us. When you get to the airport, you're flying, people are there to assist you. But for those people who are on the wheelchairs,
Right.
who are maybe autistic, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a major. I have a friend who, she has to take a taxi. Even some taxis don't want. They want immediately come. They see her. No, like her taxi cannot pick this kind of person. No. So they drive away. So it's really. I know something has to be done speedily.
What do you think
What would you
should be
suppose
done?
that
Yes.
we do?
Well, much more enlightenment because disability is not a respect of anyone.
Right.
It doesn't respect anybody. As we're saying now, in fact, like 500 people lose their sight every day. Why? Social media, you are gazing on the screens from morning till night and people don't know. So it doesn't respect anybody. The earlier we continue to advocate, the earlier we continue to enlighten, the earlier we continue to say, see, come, this is disability. For those of us living with it, please accept it and change your attitude towards it so you can, either self-develop yourself so you can cope better with it. The earlier the better.
Daniel, let me come to you. Talking about marginalization that Akinjide just said, it's widespread. It's huge. During the break, we're talking about how the government itself is not even respecting what the law provides for, as regards inclusion of persons living with disabilities in the federal cabinet. And what Akinjide just said now about even the society discriminating against persons with disabilities. And you mentioned this earlier on about education of the general public. How? Because listen, discrimination is as deadly as any disease. Marginalization is even deadlier. Yes. How do we come out of this? It's looking very bleak with the level of discrimination and marginalization systemically and societal as well.
That's why whereas I agree with Madam Ekaite that, private sector-led investment leads to more productivity. I agree. Right. And then, but the foundation is supposed to be laid by the government.
True.
Right now, remember that the government is the biggest spender.
Absolutely.
And the government taxes the people, including the families of persons with disabilities, to spend on the economy. Now, it is when the government make the ground, build the basic framework.
That's solid foundation.
Solid foundation that enhances inclusion, that the private sector can now sweep in and take it over. All over the world, what about the tax discounts that governments across the world even do for persons with disability that they have already employed?
Right.
So, look.
Do we have this currently?
We don't. Look, what if there is a disability commission? The disability commission, like the Lasoda model,
Right.
I mean, they can use the Lasoda model, where even Lasoda have a mandate to advise the government on the policies to initiate.
And just to be
it
clear,
is the commission that can actually even say, okay, if you can make a provision for a tax rebate for companies that come and invest in this area.
Right.
If the commission is not set, I am telling you to be able to pull. Okay, talking about, for instance, are you going to ask that there should be a private organization should run an airline for persons on wheelchair? No, it is to make the airport infrastructures accessible for everybody, and this spending is first and foremost to be done by the government, by the public sector, and that is even there is a provision in that law that's in the disability law that states that Ministry of Information should do capacity and extensive sensitization on the provisions of this law.
Right.
I do not know if there is a show targeting on the provisions of this law on the
law.
Information sensitization.
We
about
also
this.
have the National Orientation Agency.
There is
and they are not just for people without disability.
No.
They're for all Nigerians.
Even cultural orientation, I think that by now it will only require a circular. My show talks about this, but I don't know many other shows. We are a private station and we are doing this.
Right.
Government just needed to have issued a circular to run an extensive orientation on disability and the provisions of the law. Up till now, we don't have that.
Kaite, very quickly, Daniel mentioned Lasoda, and just to be clear, I wanted to interrupt, but I allowed Daniel to go on ahead because people are listening to us all over the world. Lasoda is the Lagos State Office for Disability Affairs. It operates, it's a Lagos State government agency that handles issues with disability people, persons living with disabilities. You are, the national president of the Joint National Association of Persons with Disability. And I'd like to ask, how many of the states we have in the country have dedicated agency for persons living with disabilities in their respective states?
I think most of the states that signed their law came with a commission or an agency.
Right.
So some of them are operational. They started operationalizing those agencies, while some are yet to set up. And like the federal one, this law came with a commission.
Right. That's section 31 of the Act.
Yes. And I'm saying this thing will not happen overnight. We have to be innovative and push. In my earlier comment, I said both the demand and the supply side need to sit and push for this to happen. We fought for the disability law for over 11 years and we got it. Now that we got it, what next do we need to do? So, it's understanding. Remember, the paradigm shift about disability is still very new. It's still very new. It used to be that welfare charity kind of a thing.
Yeah.
People are just
like people are doing you a favor.
Yes, you should be happy they're even talking about it. So now people are just beginning to understand that, oh wow, this thing is more of a human rights issue. Oh, it is a development issue. This paradigm shift is what people are still trying to understand. Even the development actors, a lot of them are just beginning to understand. I remember some years past, over 10 years ago, if you tell them, please, I want to know what you're doing, we're doing disability. They say, no, we are doing health, we are not doing disability.
Oh, really?
Or we are doing agriculture. Yes, we're doing agriculture, we are not doing disability. But that mind has shifted. Everybody's beginning to understand that, disability is a human rights issue. It's a development
Let's touch on
issue.
some very critical things also before we head to the phone lines. Now, let's talk, Mr. Kipelu, on assistive devices. So people living with disability, while they still have a disability, they need these aids. How accessible and affordable, not just for Lagos people, because people living with disabilities don't only stay in urban places. We have them in the rural areas. So how accessible are assistive devices to these people?
When you say accessible, it's really, really not accessible to the ordinary man on the street. For example, the cane I'm holding is more than almost £100. So how many people can afford that? So what we are saying is, if government can come, even if it's by way of subsidy, we're not saying give us free.
Right.
If it's by way of subsidy, everybody can afford this cane for 1,000 naira, so that the ordinary man or mother who has a child or a son in the village can go to any general hospital once you go to Lasoda. And I think I must say kudos to Lasoda. They are the only ones I think they are trying in Lagos. I've been to Abuja, been to Kaduna. They're still not as well enlightened as the way Lagos is. So in terms of accessibility, it's really, really very expensive.
Right.
The guide cane, it's not only the guide canes. The man on the wheelchair uses the wheelchair.
Right.
It's very, I think averagely you are talking about over 100,000 naira to get something at least that is manageable. We're talking about phones. We use computers. For the computers, our computers use what is called JAWS. That's job accessibility with speech. It's a screen software. That thing costs over $1,000. We know what the dollar is today. For the braille machines, a braille machine is over $1,000 too. Almost 360-something thousand naira. So how many schools can afford that? And I think these white men didn't make these things for individuals to come and buy. Right. They made it so that government or private owned companies or multinationals could come invest in them and help supply gifts.
Especially because about 50% of Nigerians are absolutely poor. So I'm listening to these amounts and wonder how many people can afford it.
Absolutely.
Important also to talk about maternal health. People living with disability also have babies.
Yes.
The women also have children.
Yes.
I was shocked one day at my former office when I saw a husband and a wife, both visually impaired, walking with the woman had a baby on her back, and then they had two other children they were holding. They did not come in a taxi. They came in a bus. I had to walk up to them to say, how do you do it? So for this group of persons also, maternal health, in our hospitals, we pay attention to women who have disabilities. They also need special care.
Yes.
And
let's say they are trying, but you go to the hospital, you spend almost all the day there. But at least special attention is being given to us. Immediately you identify, there was a time Baba Tunde Fajla, the former governor, Baba Tunde Fajla, I think he enforced it that once you're not with this guide cane, you could be arrested. So I think immediately
you would be arrested? Why?
Of course, it's just to make sure that...
It's to secure us, it's to safeguard us.
So what if I can't afford it?
And that was the essence of the agency for Lasoda.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it subsidized by Lasoda?
I'm just saying, if we have...
Is it subsidized?
It's not subsidized by Lasoda.
They could have,
I don't understand.
That can now raise the advocacy to say, Mr. Governor, because you say this is why we can't have it. And that is because under his administration, there was already a Lasoda. And for instance, just to let you know the importance of having that commission, Lasoda had, Governor Ambode set up a 500 million naira fund, Lagos State Disability Fund. Just imagine that there is a commission. It may not be funded by Lagos State government or the federal government alone, but it's an agency that can be able to do this. Look at the accessibility of these devices, for instance. If the government has a commission, the commission can say, look, we need 5 billion, we need 10 billion.
And this is what we need it for.
This is what we need it for. You then can call corporate CSR. That is not to say that the commission will still not have a budget, because when you look at Nigeria, disability work is not. We have not scratched the surface.
Let's scratch the surface.
And madam, even in terms of training, like what the society stands for. In terms of training, to train an average person costs almost ₦1 million per annum, and the society is charging like 50,000 naira. And it goes all around, the pain going around for them, raising funds.
What particular training is that?
Yes, that's to train a visual challenged person.
On
mobility, yes. You have to come from mobility, the use of computer, tie and dye, handcrafts, and so much more. The training alone is not something easy. It's not easy to.
So in the universities, say a person living with disability, they shouldn't be stopped from studying anything they want to, because it doesn't affect their reasoning. For people with physical disabilities, do we have compliance in schools as to books that you want to read as a student? Is it easy for someone with visual impairment to study?
I want to shock you that.
Let me say with a Kaiti on this one, and we need to go to the phone soon.
Yes, I was just wondering, answering all of these questions, I just wanted us to please go back to the theme of this year's celebration. It says promoting the participation of persons with disabilities and their leadership.
Yeah.
Taking action on the 2030 development agenda. So while we unpack this thing, honestly, we'll be answering a lot of these questions that we are all, talking about now. What does it mean to promote the participation of persons with disabilities and their leadership? And what does the 2030 development agenda, speak in terms of disability? So I just wanted us to look at this very briefly, because if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you find out that disability is being treated as a cross-cutting issue.
Yes,
So
that's the point.
Yes, so all these components we are raising and talking about now, it becomes very necessary for us to throw it back, to the public.
Right. We're going to the public right now. We'll open the phone lines.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to a time when we're not just talking about tie and dye, because you're a person living with disability. You must go and learn tie and dye. I mean, there are opportunities that could be accessed.
Very annoying. Very annoying.
Well,
Here are the phone numbers. We need to go to the lines now.
Call us on 01-277-0993, 01-277-1993, 01-277-2993, and 01-277-3993. This is Nigeria Info. We are listening.
This is Nigeria Info. We are listening. You can reach us on all of our social media handles. Let me read this one on WhatsApp from Umo from Egbeda, who says, "Good morning, Sheriff and Wemimo. Nothing makes people living with disability inferior beings. Government should honor every legislation to make life worth living for them." Also, there is another one. Oh my goodness, I just closed my socials.
Let me take this message from Femi Taiwo, and he says it's a great topic we have today. Unfortunately, the government policies have not catered for PWDs in any form. There was building accessibility policies, but these policies have not been enforced because it's for people with disabilities. Even some parents are not helping matters in any way. I remember how my mom did everything humanly possible to get me through treatment and make sure I went through school despite advices against that. And today I have become who I am, an independent. Society still has a lot of orientation. National Orientation Agency has not done anything in this regard. We have Michael joining us from Moe. Michael, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank God for the last speaker that talked about the questions on Vision 2030 as proposed by SDG.
Right.
But the question now is this. How about Vision 2020? What happened to it?
Where did we get to?
Yeah, what a big achievement.
Well, that's a good question there.
Yes. Am I supposed to respond to that?
No,
Yes,
I think that was just a rhetoric question.
Yes.
I think we all know the answer to that just by looking around. Let's head over to Facebook. Raphael Adekoke says, "I don't agree with that statistics. Everyone has one form of disability or the other." Well, Femi Taiwo, interesting. Femi Taiwo on Facebook says, "It's a great topic we have today. Unfortunately, the government policies have not catered for people living with disabilities." And it says that there was building accessibility policies, but these policies have not been enforced because it's for people with disabilities. Even some parents are not helping matters in any way. I remember. Oh, okay. Isn't that the message we read earlier?
That's right.
Okay. When I heard my mom, it clicks. Raphael Adegoke says, "Go to our roads, churches, banks, schools. There are no specially assigned passages for people with disabilities, even in churches."
Right.
Daniel.
Right. It has to do
And
with
all religious houses.
consciousness, even social consciousness about the value that we attach to persons with disability. Like somebody said, look, all of us somehow have temporary ability because as we age,
Temporary disability.
temporary ability.
Temporary
Yes, because
ability.
as we age, even our hearing, we begin to have
Right.
a level of hearing
Absolutely.
impairment.
Absolutely.
Basic.
Yes, you're right.
So that's why we have to all of us have to be committed to advocating for inclusion. Mind you, me and Madam Ekaite last year, we were in World Bank event, and the World Bank identified that when there is effective inclusion, it enhances the GDP by between
yes,
2
it
to
does.
7%.
Oh, yes, it
So
does.
inclusion is not a cost; it's an advantage.
Right.
Because you
Right.
have more people
Yes.
who can work.
Who can work,
and
who can
pay
consume.
taxes.
Yes.
Daniel, I want to stay with you. What are the problems that we're having as regards inclusivity? It's almost like it's something that we keep talking about every year December 3. Every year December 3, inclusion is always a problem. Some people have mentioned that poverty is a big cause for lack of inclusion of persons living with disabilities in Nigeria.
There is a correlation. Like just the data you read, that 20% of poor people, and poverty leads to disability, and disability actually leads to poverty. If it's not multifaceted approach tackled, that is the government coming. Look, you have a budget of 10 trillion. Can you say even 10% or 5% of that budget? That is that number is around 500 billion, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
500 billion, why not set it for the people you have left behind over ages of underinvestment, extensive underinvestment? Could you imagine if you can set up the commission, say we have only 100 billion. Yes, it will transform. Talking of the inclusive education you talk about, what it's all about is about putting the facilities and the human capital in an environment that does not segregate people, removing all barriers, including social. And the education will be enhanced. And remember, when you have the education, every other aspect for persons with disabilities.
I like to sit on the law that we currently have. Let me ask Mr. Akinpelu on this one. So poverty, education. Again, I'm looking forward to a time where I don't want to hear that because you have a disability, the only thing you can do is learn tie and dye or learn how to make shoes and bags. But I've met people living with disability who function properly, maximally, who run companies. I mean, I've seen a documentary of someone who's got cerebral palsy, who's a CEO. So there are these opportunities, and how do we drive this equality of opportunities even for persons living with disability?
But permitting my own perspective of this inclusion or inequality, I want to see it in a different way. Inclusion means you want those regular and those with people living with disability or have this one form to coexist or cohabit. Yes, it's good. But before that, I think for me, when I lost sight way back, I felt very bad until I went to the society to get some form of education or the other.
Right.
That encouraged me. So I want whatever form of disability you are either passing to please first go to where you can be retrained, where you can be re-equipped. You understand? First, before now talking about inclusion, because it is after then you can now say, okay, after getting the basic education, using of the braille and all, that you will not find in any regular setting.
Right.
Nobody, except I'm studying abroad, because if I'm studying abroad, they definitely will ask me what facilities you want to use. Do you want to use braille? Do you want to use your computer?
And they adapt it.
And that is what we are talking about.
So you need to empower yourself first.
Yes, I think.
But how about if there is a platform for you to empower yourself?
And that is the inclusion.
The schools are empowered. The schools are equipped, well equipped. You don't have to attend any special school
or pay so much.
Is the government willing to get the itinerary teachers?
Well, we started with questions. I think we're wrapping up with more questions because we cannot exhaust this topic.
Ekaite wanted to say something very briefly, Ekaite, because we're out of time.
I just wanted to say that we will not be able to address the issue of inclusion except we understand what leads to exclusion. We must understand what leads to exclusion. When we understand what leads to exclusion, that is when we can effectively address the issues of inclusion. So exclusion has to do with those barriers. We have to break down those barriers.
And the government has to lead in breaking those barriers.
We have to budget intentionally to pulling down those barriers to achieve inclusion. So let's start even looking at those exclusions so that we can improve inclusion.
Absolutely. Ekaite Judith Umor is the National President of Joint National Association of Persons with Disability and also the General Secretary of Africa Disability Forum. We thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Daniel Oti runs a program on Nigeria Info. Daniel, start your program quickly.
Well, my program on tomorrow, Thursdays, Disability Not Inability Show by 10. We do it all angles.
You should listen every week from 10 a.m. Daniel is from the Albino Foundation. Daniel, thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Akinjide Akinpelu is from the Federal Nigeria Society for the Blind. We thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
This conversation certainly will go on throughout the day on Nigeria.
I feel like we should just extend it.
No, we can't. We need to pay the bills right now, so we need to go. Guys, we'll be seeing you again tomorrow morning. I will try to x-ray the finance bill from next year. You might need to provide your tax document before you can use your bank account or go access your bank. Yes, it will. Listen in
Yes.
tomorrow morning. I am Wemimo Adewuni.
And I am Sheriff Quadry. Do you have yourself a fantastic day? Money, Business and Economy show is next after the news.
More news and information coming up. We'll be back in a moment.